Hello, everyone, and welcome to Join the Convo. Thanks you so much for joining us today. My name is Fred Smith, and I'm going to be your host for this program. And I'm so excited that you've decided to take some time to learn a little bit and to take some action against racial injustice in this country. You know, I had the idea for doing this back in 2017 when all the Charlottesville stuff was happening. And of course, the country was moved at that time. But unfortunately, the window of opportunity to do something like this just wasn't as great. But now, as all of you know, we're in the middle of a movement. And this movement is going to make change. And it's going to make change because of those of you who are on here today. I'm so excited. We have assembled an amazing group of speakers. You're going to hear lots of stories. You're going to hear action plans. This was designed based on conversations I've had with some of my friends who say, Fred, my white friends, Fred, I can't believe that racism still exists. I had no idea. I'm awoken. I want to do something, but I don't know what to do. And that's what we're here tonight to do. We're going to discuss, we're going to laugh, maybe even cry. We're going to have a good time. This is going to be an inclusive environment. We're not here to place blame on anybody. We're here to learn and educate. And my hope is that when you leave here today, you feel like you're better equipped to tackle racism. So with that, let's go ahead and get things started. Today's a panel. Today's a town hall where we're going to have a couple of segments, and it's going to be interactive. So I encourage you, if you're on YouTube or if you're on Facebook, to interact in the chat. We'll be collecting questions, and at the end of each segment, we'll address those questions, time permitting. As I said, this is an inclusive environment, so we want to keep everything positive. That's what we're here for, and I'm sure if you've tuned in, you're going to be a positive person. So let's go ahead and start with segment one. Segment one, I've collected a group of individuals who are going to walk us through their journey of being minorities or even non-minorities in this country. We're going to have open and honest dialogue about race. Let me go ahead and start to introduce who will be speaking with us. And as I make introductions tonight, we're going to always start with ladies first. So my first guest is Miss MERLE Dandridge. MERLE Dandridge is a Broadway voiceover and television actress, and she's the star of OWN's hit TV show, Greenleaf. Welcome, MERLE.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here.
It's great to have you. Next, a man we all know, Cam Newton. Cam Newton is an NFL quarterback. He's an entrepreneur. He's a philanthropist, Heisman Trophy winner, former star quarterback at Auburn, but most importantly, former star quarterback at the University of Florida. Go Gators. Cam, thank you for joining us here tonight.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Happy to be here.
All right. Next, my very good friend, Nate Hibble. Nate is an Atlanta restaurateur. He's the owner of Gusto Restaurants, and he's also a former NFL quarterback. What's up, Nate?
Hey, Fred. How you doing, man?
I'm good, man. And next, Mr. Terrence Smith. Terrence is a community leader and director of middle school at Buckhead Church. Welcome, Terrence.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
All right. And finally, my good friend, Mr. Heath Ward. Heath Ward is an Atlanta health coach. He's a community builder, and he is the owner of Lion Chaser Fitness. Heath, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Fred. Good
Heath, you're looking pretty good, man. I think we're going to go ahead and start with you, Heath.
All right, let's do it.
All right, so how you doing this evening? You pretty good?
I'm good. Yeah, I'm good. I'm excited to be here, and thank you for putting this together.
Great. So Heath and I have known each other for 7 years. We both have a lot of things in common. We're both involved in faith. We're both involved in fitness. We're both business owners. And in addition to that, he and I have grown up as Black men in the United States in multiple parts of the country. So Heath, we're going to jump right into it. You ready?
All right, let's do it.
When is the first time you experienced racism?
All right, so let's get right into it. So it happened at an early age. I was only about 5 or 6 years old. I grew up in Greater Boston in Massachusetts, and about 5 or 6 years old, my parents both worked in finance in downtown Boston. And during the summer, when I was around 5 or 6, they would drop me off at a YMCA in Boston, like a day camp. And that was the first location where it happened. Coming home, they would pick me up after work and bring me home, and had dinner one night. we had some chicken nuggets. You know, as kids, you love chicken nuggets, and I was referring to the chicken nuggets as nigger, 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 and my mom was like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, where'd you hear that word?" And I was like, "The kids call me that at school," and she was like, "Oh, heck nah." And so we went down to the YMCA and we uncovered some more truths about me being bullied, the name calling. They were even like throwing basketballs at my head and just terrorizing me. And so we made the quick move to get out of there, out of the after school program. But that was the first time that I knew that was different. I associated that name with being super negative, and that kind of set the tone for the rest of my my childhood.
So you knew at the time that the word was negative, but you didn't quite know what it meant, right?
I didn't know what it meant at that time, no.
So when your parents spoke to you about the word, you realized at that point that you shouldn't use that word, and you felt it was a negative thing. Did that continue on through childhood, or did it get any better?
No, it didn't get better. I grew up in a predominantly white neighborhood, so K through 12 was a struggle. I had bouts with racism and bullying and fights all throughout my childhood, and that was kind of like the starting point of it all, right then and there.
So it never got better, not even through high school or college?
Well, I will say that once I got to college, I had more of a bigger environment to have more a diverse friend group, as well as people more empathetic to just me being different. And so like the diversity and inclusion piece was there, going to college in Boston. So that was great. But during high school, no. During middle school and elementary school, no.
Man. So at some point you made the transition from the North down to the South in Atlanta, right?
Yep. I moved down to Atlanta in 2011. Yep.
In 2011. So explain to me what the difference was between living in Boston as a Black man and then living down in the South in Atlanta as a Black man.
In short, I would say that all my negative experiences being a Black man in the North were, you know, years 0 through 30 would be more covert racism. And but, you know, I had allies along the way. I had a strong church home. I had some great friends that fought for me, as well as great teachers along the way. Just a little bit more empathy. When I got down south to Atlanta, I was coached up by my friends that already lived here, as well as my family members that were already here, in terms of how to deal with things and how it was different than growing up more up north. And so my experiences were just more blatant, more in your face, so to speak.
So give me an example of the type of in your face racism you experienced in the South.
Okay. 2014.
We're getting into it today. We're getting into it.
Yeah, we are, man. You're peppering me with the questions, so that's good. That's good. So 2014, I lived in Perimeter at the time. I was still in corporate America before becoming an entrepreneur and owner. And it was getting really close to football time. And I was in a fantasy football league, and I had to give my buddy some money for the league. And so, you know how a lot of these apartment complexes are in Atlanta. There's like a leasing office in the front. And so I met a buddy who's parked out in front to deliver him some money for the league. And it was around Friday night, 10:30. It was late, and just ran out there with some shorts and a t-shirt and some flip-flops. I forgot my ID, which, you know, I know that's a big no-no. My dad coached me well on that, but it is what it is. And I went to meet him to get some money, and I was talking to him in his you know, outside of his car, and I was rushed by 4 to 6 squad cars and the police, undercover cops, plainclothes officers, and they came up right on me, and they proceeded to interrogate me and question me. And I was really, really shook. I asked my friend to not go anywhere, Cedric, and it seemed like forever. And I had to like essentially just prove who I was, and I wasn't a suspect for what they were looking for. And at one point I asked them, like, who are you looking for? And they just repeated over again, some of them meet your description. And that was the scariest moment in my life up to that point, dealing with the police. At some point I convinced them of who I was. But before I even did that, I made a motion that I lived here, and I moved my hands, and a couple of officers drew their guns. So that was when I was like, oh boy, I'm in trouble.
So you had the guns drawn on you in your yard?
Yeah, by a couple of officers. And it was just a really scary moment. I asked my friend to stay there. He remained. And eventually I proved who it was. They felt comfortable with what I was saying, and they left. They just kept it moving, and I was in shock. And I had a conversation with my buddy.
Let me ask you this question. So at a young age, the kids called you the N-word. It never got better growing up. You moved to Atlanta, and you say that racism was even more overt at that time than it was in Boston, right? Right. So you're going through all of these life experiences, but you live in Buckhead, which is a predominantly white neighborhood. So how do you stay? Everyone who knows you, Heath, knows you're jovial and positive. So how do you withstand all of that negativity, or does it affect you in some ways?
It affects me. People that know me best, like you, I confide in you and have very deep conversations about how I'm feeling in the moment. But I do definitely suppress my feelings, and I don't talk about it as much. I just keep it moving, and I have we talk about faith all the time, Fred, and I put my faith and trust in God, and it's a comfort when in those times of hopelessness like that one situation.
Well, you're a strong man, Heath, and we're going to come back to that idea of suppression a little bit later, because that's a really powerful thing. It's something I've dealt with. And when we have a talk with Jennifer Brown later on in this, we're going to talk about suppression and how we can show up as our full selves at some time. So Heath, thank you for your candid conversation. We're going to come back to you later when we do our Q&A. But next, I'd like to move on to the man who needs no introduction, Mr. Cam Newton. Cam, you're looking good, man.
Man, you caught me at a good time, man. I'm leaving church.
Okay, all right. Yeah, man. I got to come to church with you one day. I have to get a new wardrobe first, though. Cam, thanks for your time here today. Cam and I have known each other for a little bit. He's an incredible person, both on the field and off the field. And I thank you for joining us today. And I'm going to start with the same question that I asked Heath. I'd love to ask you. So as a man of color growing up in the South now, did you deal with racism growing up, and either personally or professionally playing football? And how has that shaped how you show up in the world now?
You know what? As Heath was talking, I was, kind of thinking like, can I give a story? And to be honest with you, my athletic prowess have always kind of sheltered me, to a degree. Now, me growing up in Atlanta, I was raised in the more predominantly African-American side of Atlanta.
Okay. And,
from College Park. So my first interaction on a day-to-day basis with any type of ethnic religion or anything like that was opposed of what I'm used to seeing in the Black community was probably a person of higher authority. I would have a teacher that may have been white. We seen police officers that were white, but for the most part, everything was Black. And I probably seen racism probably in high school when I was going to different football camps, but nothing that really was as disgusting as you would hear in other situations. Now, my first interaction with a more, I would say gruesome situation probably took place in college. And coming from a person, I graduated early from Westlake High School. So I was 17, 18 years old. So that's 18 years without knowing how to cope, be compatible, being around, in essence, Caucasians. So when I went to college, that was kind of the first time waking up, seeing, being in their interactions, talking on a day-to-day basis with a person of a different race. And it didn't happen when I was at University of Florida. It happened probably when I was in, I had to go to junior college. And that junior college was in Burnham, Texas. And for every year of my life, I think I got to blend when I was around like 21 or 20. I was 20 years old. I was 20 years old at Blend. And being in Texas was kind of like the most apparent racism, just being a relatively large, more than average human, being African-American.
Right.
And not looking like your normal, American citizen, kind of, caught people by surprise to a degree, being in a small town. But at the same time, I remember going out with friends. In this particular place, we had to go to College Station, which is the home of Texas A&M. And Blinn is in Brenham, Texas, which is in the middle of Austin, Houston, Prairie View, and College Station. So we all go out as teammates. And one of my teammates, you know, kind of got there prior to me. And they were saying, meet me at this particular club. Meet me at this particular club. We are here, XYZ, right? So as me and a couple of African-American players, we were to meet them at this club. It's clearly an empty club. So when we look in, we see our friends, and we're just trying, at this particular point, wait for a tab. The bouncer then insists and says, no, we're not letting you in tonight.
So they said that to you?
They said that to me. They said that to me.
Okay.
So then I asked what the reason was, and then he said, well, you know, you guys don't fit the, you're not up to dress code. So I said, well, what's the dress code? He said, you can't wear white t-shirts. I said, well, I have a polo. I remember having a polo shirt on. But when I looked in the club, my friend, who was Caucasian, a receiver, he had a t-shirt on. And I was like, well, we're meeting people here, just trying to give the whole rundown of trying to make him comfortable, knowing that, you know, here we're meeting people here, but at the same time, you know, what's the issue? And long story short, it came out that, you know, we weren't accepted in that type of club. And that kind of really, that in my adult life, when I can, you know what's right and what's wrong, seeing that kind of transaction kind of was like, oh wow, this is real. And this was what, in 2009, 8, and it just blew me back. So yeah,
you know, Cam, you know, that experience right there, you know, I can relate to that living in Atlanta as well. There's been a lot of talk about white flight, something called white flight, and anyone who's been in hospitality in Atlanta has probably seen it. And that's the situation where, and I hate that this happens. I absolutely hate it that it happens, but it's an observed phenomenon where in some of the bars or clubs that may have predominantly white people, if you get a certain percentage of black people, quite frankly, you'll start to see the patrons leave that establishment. So they call it white flight. And a lot of the ways that the establishments work against that is through their dress code. So some establishments have very long dress code. You walk up there and you see a list of like 30 things on the dress code, but they're using that so that they can say, you can't get in. See, it's on the dress code list. You can't get in, right? It happened to me at an establishment in Atlanta, and I don't know how you felt, but I was livid. I was livid. It embarrassed me in front of my friends. My friends left. They were ticked off. And I mean, no matter how strong you are, that goes against your dignity. So how did you feel when that happened to you, Cam? And you were Cam. I was just Fred in Atlanta. You were Cam.
No, to be honest with you, in junior college, I was just a regular dude. You know what I'm saying? I don't believe it. With the dollar and the dream, you know what I'm saying? Just like anybody else. But at the same time, you feel hopeless. It's like, huh? And I'm reminded by a cliche saying, but you know, somebody probably quoted, and pardon me for not knowing, but you know, racism, just like any other thing, is taught. You know, you're taught that. You're taught to treat this particular person different. You're taught to treat, you know, certain people, you know, a certain type of way, good, bad, or indifferent. So, you know, for that stigma to be just off of a visual look at a person, man, you know, from a person who has kids and, you know, you try to teach them right from wrong, it's hard to kind of explain to them you may or may not, you know, be treated fairly. But at the same time, you know, it's life, and we all, you know, try to prompt our own environment in a way as best as we can. You know, that's very similar to Heath, and I mean, I hate that we have to deal with these things, and that's what this whole town hall is about, right? But at some point, we have to accept reality for reality. We have to dig deep, and we can either let it defeat us or we can overcome it, right? So you've been able to overcome it. Cam, let's talk a little bit about football real quick. Correct. So recently, we're seeing companies from NASCAR to the NFL come out and make statements in support of what's been going on, right? And in particular, well, NASCAR, that was a huge statement, right? I think NASCAR probably lost some of its fans, but I think they gained a lot more fans. Every black person I speak to says, hey,
I'm in the NASCAR now, right?
Right.
So that was a great move. But at the NFL in particular, back on June 5th, Roger Goodell made a comment, and I quote, he said, "We, the National Football League, admit we were wrong for not listening to the NFL players earlier, and encourage all to speak out and peacefully protest. We, the National Football League, believe Black Lives Matter." And as my last question to you, Cam, I would love to know how you feel, because you've been part of the NFL 3 years ago when the kneeling happened, and now when Roger Goodell comes out and makes such a declarative statement in support of racial injustice. So I wanted to know, as a football player and a very prominent football player, how does that make you feel to know that your organization stands behind you?
Well, now I think more than ever, organizations, Fortune 500 companies are now being forced to choose a side. And I think that's what the whole peaceful protest was about. Because when you have a generation of people who have been oppressed or have been, taken advantage of to a degree, and I want to make sure that I choose my words very carefully, and knowing that here is something in sports that brings a lot of people together. I think that the notion of what Kaepernick or Colin Kaepernick kind of stood for kind of got blown out of proportion, because you had people of power not really articulating his real message of what he wanted people to see. By no means it means disrespect by kneeling. By no means does people, when we make protests, are come with a notion that we want to disrespect anything. If anything, we're trying to bring attention to certain things. And I think that's all you can ask for. And for me to see not only the NFL, but other different corporations and businesses, all across America, even the world, taking a stand and realizing, okay, number one, these people are fed up. We have to do better. When they say land of the free and we all are equal, you have to really mean that, and I think, being a person of position, I have to make a conscientious decision and be very, very aware that a lot of people live vicariously through you, right. And knowing that a lot of people from where I'm from in College Park, Atlanta, Georgia, they may not have the voice that, a Fred Smith may have, a Cam Newton may have, or whoever may have, but you have to be able to, when you're in that position, you have to be able to give them hope. And that's all it really leads to.
Yeah. I mean, Cam, thank you for just speaking on that. And I know obviously it's a sensitive issue, but we have to, and one thing, I'm gonna talk about a little bit later is companies, individuals, despite their past, it looks like they're trying to make a step right now towards doing the right thing. And so for us as minorities, or anybody who's disgruntled or angry, I think it's on us to take the high road now. It's the only way we're going to bridge a gap and walk together forward, despite what's happened in the past. So I appreciate you taking the optimistic tone. We're going to come back to, I think we're going to come back to you a little later on with the Q&A, but thanks, Cam, for sharing.
Appreciate you, buddy.
All right, man. Next, we're going to talk with MERLE. Hi, MERLE.
Hey, Fred.
Thanks again for joining us. MERLE's coming to us from the West Coast.
Hello.
And I would like to start out similarly to how I've asked the other questions, but you have such a rich background and rich history, and you've done so much in Broadway and on TV. I want you to just dig into your story, because I know your story starts from before you were even born. So tell us a little bit about your story, MERLE.
Well, for those who don't know me, my name's MERLE DANDRIDGE. I am half Black and half Asian, but my mother is Japanese and Korean. And if you know anything about those cultures, she was born in 42 when the bomb was happening in Japan. I was born in Japan. And Japan and Korea are cultures that have been at odds. And it was the conflict between them was so aggressive that at that time, Japanese didn't even want to be seen buying garlic for fear of being mistaken for Korean. Wow. And this is the culture that my mom is born out of. And then her father was Korean. She was there when Korea split, and she has, you know, and her father was taken. She never saw him again. But her first two languages are Japanese and Korean, and she would not speak either for fear of being ridiculed for her dialect in either. So with that, my mother carried that when we ended up and landed, because my father was EOD squad, the bomb squad in the Air Force, and we landed in Omaha, Nebraska, which is extremely homogenous, extremely white. And right. My mother carried that mantra that MERLE, she wanted to arm me with the fact that people are not going to like you when you walk in the room because of how you look. So be ready for that. And I, you know, as an adult, I started to get mad at her. Like, Mom, you really put it on me to be like, you know, dukes up when I walk in a room. And my sister, who her father was Korean, she said to me, she's like, no, MERLE. The reality is that she said that because that was happening to you. She's like, I've seen the white kids kick dirt in your face. I've seen all of that. And
so MERLE, let me just interject real quick. So are you saying that they were observing racial microaggressions towards you, but you were unaware of it? Is that what was happening, your mother and your sister?
No. I think that my family is a completely different conversation. We have so many different cultures within that would probably be, that would take us away from the focus of what I want to get at today, yeah. Which is that we were dropped in a place where we were not accepted. And I'll say this, that everyone has a story. Everyone has so many stories right now, you know? And what this unearthing of all of our traumas has done, I think is given us a forum in which we feel seen and heard. And we are, and also it's unraveling so many things that have happened that we maybe took as norm, and bringing in a new wave of rage and hurt and pain. And if you're in the midst of that, I encourage you to sit with it, lean into it, meditate on it. If you have a faith, lean on your faith. Consider therapy, talk to your friends, and let this rage move through you. Work through it as we all work through it as a culture, because we are all enraged. And I think about being in Nebraska and this young man, James Scurlock, who was killed there last week. And I think about how little that culture gave me in understanding my identity. Yes, I learned that Eli Whitney made the cotton gin. Did I learn anything about the influx of needed manpower to make up and satisfy the extra labor that was created because the cotton gin was doing so many other things? Did I learn that Malcolm X was born in Omaha? Did I learn any of those things? I had to go and seek those out as an adult. And being in the white culture, it just, the understanding that we are less than, that we are separate, we are subhuman isn't the right, well, maybe that is the right word. That, you know, even someone like me, I couldn't get a date until I left Nebraska and went to college, because wow. That would not have been acceptable. So anyway.
Speaking of, I mean, you just hit on so many different things from, you know, and this is a theme that we've heard now from all of the guests so far, which is, you know, battling racism as a child and it not necessarily getting better until adulthood, until you find yourself as an adult. And MERLE, you're such an accomplished entertainer. Can you talk to us a little bit about Greenleaf and your participation in Greenleaf?
Yeah, Greenleaf is a show that I have been very blessed to be a part of for the past 5 years. Season 5 is coming out next week. Oprah Winfrey produced it and starred as my aunt in it, which is really, really neat. I play what we call the prodigal daughter. It's based in Memphis, which my family on my dad's side, we're all up in the Memphis Black church. I'm one of maybe almost 50 first cousins. My dad is one of 8. And, you know, the numbers go up and up from there. I think my big mom was one of 14. Whoa. So we're a big family. We're all up in Memphis. If you live in Memphis, you probably know some of my folks. And anyway, Greenleaf is set in a Black megachurch in Memphis, but it's about the story of a family that is overcoming a lot of things. Mm-hmm. And my character has come home after a 20-year absence because of her sister's death. And her sister she knew of her sister being abused by their uncle, who was also high up in the church when she was young, and has an inkling that it might have been suicide. So when she gets there, she turns over the tables, she knocks things over, and she gets to the root of the issue. And that is the genesis of seasons of A Lot of Delight. Thank you for a lot of y'all who've been rocking with us. And it's been an honor to be a part of that. But speaking of getting to the root, that is what I feel like we are doing right now, because the root is rotten.
What I love about Greenleaf is it really takes you behind the scenes of the Black church and the Black culture, both on the positive side, and then some of the stories that, you know, people who especially go to white churches are unaware of. But you are a pastor in Greenleaf, and you're also a woman of faith in real life. So I just wanted to ask as a final question, especially playing that pastor, how has faith played into your journey dealing with racism, and also just standing strong as such a strong actress and entertainer?
The great thing about knowing that God is on the throne is that it's all going to be all right. It's all going to be all right. He has got it taken care of. He is Amen. Ordering your steps. And there is nothing that can be taken away from you that he has meant for you. And he is working something out that we cannot even imagine right now. And it has been painful going through what we have gone through in these past weeks, but you know, the past 400 years, but having a faith and knowing he's got it, knowing he is leading you from strength to strength, higher and higher, gives you great peace in a very volatile, competitive, sometimes very dark industry where people will come for you. They will come for you in really crafty, deceitful ways. And you can let those things roll right off. When you first were on set with Oprah, didn't she give you some words of inspiration as well to that? Oh, yeah, that's right. Our very first day of shooting, Oprah and I had 16 full hours we were in the same set all day long because we were shooting out 3 of her episodes. And it was just her and I. And, you know, I think a little bit of the way that I grew up in the environment that I grew up in, I did have a tendency to shrink. And she saw it. She saw it right away. She said, "Merle, as Maya always told me, you must stand to your full stature." And I had carried that. And I started to walk with my shoulders back, swagger a little bit. Because I'm a queen.
I love it. I love it. Merle, thank you so much for your time. I love that quote. We're gonna share that out. You know, we must stand to our full stature. Thank you so much for your time, and we'll come back to you during the Q&A. Thank you. And sticking with the faith theme, I want to bring on as my next guest, Mr. Terrence Smith. Terrence Smith. Hey, what's up, Terrence? Good to see you, man.
Hey, man. Likewise, brother.
All right. Terrence, we're gonna jump right in like we did with the others.
All right.
Tell me, what pivotal experiences did you have growing up dealing with racism, and how did it affect you?
Man, you are jumping right in.
Let's
So for me, man, race overall, race and culture has been a huge part of my life for as long as I can remember, Fred. Growing up, right around the time I was in second grade, my majority Black neighborhood was bused to an all-white school that was about 35 minutes from my neighborhood. And that's significant because there was a school right up the street that was about 5 minutes up the street. And it caused a bit of an uproar because we didn't understand what was going on. And so my parents even fought it. So I went there for elementary school and came back to the city for middle school, which was predominantly a Black school with a small population of white people. And then in high school, it was about 50-50 split. And then I went to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill for college, which was a majority white institution with a strong Black culture, a strong Black group of people that were there at the time. And so in terms of my life in general, I've moved in and out of those cultures for my entire existence. But I would have to say that my first time really dealing with racism or even understanding the race that I was or that I am, it was an incident that happened when I was about 7 at that school. And so one day I was going to get a drink of water at the water fountain, and there was a guy, a young boy the same age as me, who told me that I needed to go and find my own water fountain because that one wasn't for people like me.
Wow. Wow. What year was this, Terrence?
Man, this would have been 1990, probably 1990.
Man, so you mean even in 1990, a 7-year-old kid made a statement that goes way back to the 70s, which is you can't use the same water fountain as me? That doesn't make any sense.
Brother, and I think that's the thing, Fred, and I think Cam spoke to this earlier about things being taught. It's clear that had to have been taught that somehow, some way, whether it was inadvertent or it was something that was actually, literally passed down. So yeah, man, definitely changed a lot that day. And I didn't understand it at the time. I didn't really know what it meant, but I knew it wasn't right. And so got in a bit of a disagreement with that gentleman. And that kind of was my first experience with racism.
So transitioning from that, now you're a pastor at Buckhead Church. How's your experience with race been in Atlanta and at Buckhead Church? Is it better? I mean, you're in a now faith environment where it's expected that we all are created equally. And I'm not, trying to throw you under the bus or anything like that, or throw Buckhead Church under the bus at all. But I'm just wondering, from a faith standpoint, did you feel more accepted in that environment? So
initially, no. I started out as an intern. And here's the thing. I love Buckhead Church. I love everything about it. I love being there, and it is my church. But starting out as an intern, I remember this was about a little over 6 years ago. I remember feeling like I didn't necessarily belong in that space, only because it was only like 1 or 2 of us at the time. And but over time, as people got to know me and I got to know others, and conversations began to at least have some type of depth to them, I realized that there was just I don't think anyone had ever experienced a person like me coming in those doors. I was a Black man. I'm about 6'1", 215 pounds, had a beard and hair on my head. And I felt like I didn't necessarily fit the profile for what traditionally I think had been in that particular space in terms of being in ministry. And so over time, the conversations have grown more and more of depth, and it feels more and more, it's beginning, and it has begun to feel more and more like my home. And I'm glad that I'm a part of it now.
I mean, that's great. And what role do you think the church has in racial reconciliation?
Honestly, man, I think there's a huge part, because I think for a long time, the church has been part of the problem. Like if you look through history and even going through Jamar Tisby's The Color of Compromise, the book, it highlights the challenges of the institutional racism that exists within the church. And if you look at the things that have been done to people of color overall, whether it be the slavery or the pastors that Dr. King was writing to in the letter from the Birmingham jail, there's been a part of complicity on the part of the church overall, in terms of, I would say, the predominantly white church. Because we also know that the church, which is also the Black church as well, was a huge part of the reason why the civil rights movement, a lot of it was birthed out of that space. That's so right. So it really just depends, man. There's multiple facets to this ideology of what is the church. And I think now we have the responsibility to challenge people, and we have the responsibilities to challenge ourselves in a space that says, hey, we are about what Jesus is about. And Jesus is about people who don't necessarily look like you. In fact, I think that, Jesus, his own stature, he was born in a manger, and he came of all different types of lineage, of not necessarily pure blood. He himself had part of what it meant to be a person that was not like others at times. So I think that he gravitates, and Jesus gravitates to people that are the ones who are downtrodden, and also the ones who are sometimes the outcasts. And so I think if we are to preach what Jesus is preaching and love in the way that Jesus loves, I think that ultimately will help us be in a better space.
Thank you, Terrence. I'm part of Buckhead Church as well. And so my small group, we've talked quite a bit about what's been going on, and we believe we're the salt of the earth. The Bible is very clear on racism. It's just not tolerated. And so we have to be the example for those outside of our church circle to set the tone and be the example. Terrence, thank you for sharing. And next, finally, on this first segment, I want to bring in my man, Mr. Nate Hibble. Nate, how you doing, my friend?
Feeling inspired, man.
Yeah. These have been some great stories, Nate. And Nate is partially responsible for us even doing this today based on the conversations he and I have had over the last few years. He has a strong passion for racism in the country. And so I wanted to bring him in on this panel to give a different perspective. He's a business owner, but he's very passionate about creating an environment that's inclusive. Nate, tell me why you're so passionate about racism.
Because a human is a damn human. I've always considered myself somebody who wants to lead by truly trying to consider walking in another's shoes, and the arrogance that it takes for somebody to think that they are better than somebody else just based off the shoes that they walk in that they didn't choose. It shatters my heart, shatters my brain, because I see pain in my black teammates' eyes, because I see anger in the Uber driver's side eye when I get in the back, and there's immediate. I just feel the delta between our lives, and I'm kind of an empathic guy, and I've been feeling that, and it's been burning a hole in my soul for quite some time. And we're growing a company, and we're about 250 team members deep right now, and about 150 of those are black men and women that I'm proud to call teammates. So just listening to those folks and hearing their stories, it's been in me for quite some time, as you know, Fred. But I feel activated right now. This feels like a rip in the universe, feels like a real opportunity. So I want to know how I can do my part and empower the best I can.
You've been doing a lot in our personal conversations, and I know, even given what's been going on recently, the protesting and rioting, we've talked about that before. You own 6 restaurants in the Atlanta area, and even up to last night, we had some riots in Atlanta. But I just wanted to get your take on a couple of things that I've heard from some of my friends who I've had really challenging conversations with. So on the point of protesting versus rioting, and you're someone who's exhibited damage to your restaurants from riots, what are your thoughts on protesting versus riot? Are they related? Are protesters responsible for what's happening in the rioting?
I mean, I don't know if I'm qualified to fully answer that, but my perspective is that protesting is what this country is built on them. That's where change comes from. Healthy change. Protests are healthy. Unfortunately, we have news agencies that are just scaring the hell out of everybody. They're coming for you. They're coming to burn things down. Protesters in Atlanta, primarily peaceful, and I stand with them. And I had some windows broken, but it's glass and minor things. I told my guys we wanted to look at it with soft and kind eyes, because looting and some of the riots and some of the aggravation that has come with peaceful protests, they're not the thing. They're not the damn thing. The thing is the message, and the demand for justice.
Speaking of justice, when you hear the words "all lives matter," when someone says Black Lives Matter and they respond with "all lives matter," how does that make you feel?
Well, I think it's a great question for me as a privileged white dude, kind of blonde hair, blue eye, white guy at the top of the privilege pyramid. And it's taken me some time to fully understand that, and I'm studying it. But I would say a year or two ago, Fred, candidly, I remember having a conversation that I was like, I don't get Black Lives Matter. It feels selective, and it's this group, and I'm not sure that it makes me feel weird. I'm not sure it's doing what it's intended to do. But now my tune has completely shifted as my eyeballs are more open, and I feel like, as I said earlier, this is a moment in time. So, of course, all lives matter. But at this moment, Black Lives Matter, and that logo needs to be highlighted. It needs amplification. It needs pushed to the front, because this is a moment where it's not one is better than the other. It's let's gain some ground on this delta of privilege. So I'm proud of that growth, but of course all lives matter. But at this stage in the game, in this moment in time, I proudly say Black Lives Matter, and we have to highlight it. We gotta intensify and push that opportunity to the front.
You know, Nate, I've been observing your restaurant's Gusto, and through coronavirus, you guys were proactive in finding creative ways to grow your business even in downturn, when the rest of the economy is in a downturn. And now through this that we're going through, I mean, I have to commend you for all the work you've done in representing and being a good example for a company on how to address these matters. It hurt my heart when I heard that your restaurants got broken into, because I felt like you were the last person who deserved to have that. But I think your words ring true in that it's just glass. There's insurance for that, but there's a bigger matter at heart. And Nate, I want to ask this question to you, but then also to everybody else, because one of the themes in this first panel has been overcoming pain. Nate, you've overcome pain when people look at you a certain way and make expectations. You've overcome pain when you're building your company and you're empathic, like you said, you're feeling the pain of others. But it's been a recurring theme now for all of the guests. So I'd love to go back to you, Terrence. What are your thoughts on, or any advice that you can give our audience on how to overcome, especially speaking to the minorities or empathetic people like Nate, who are just feeling so down right now? What advice would you give?
Well, I honestly would have to go with what MERLE said. And I think that if you don't have hope, man, you don't have anything. And I think that experiencing all the emotions, all the frustration, the anger, every single thing that you feel, and feel the freedom to do that, and know that it's okay to feel the freedom. But I also believe that there's on the other side of it, there's a level of hope. And I think that even in my time right now, where for the last few weeks, I have been all over the place emotionally. Emotionally in terms of I've been angry, I've been exhausted, I've been depleted, I've been frustrated, I've cried random tears at times. And there's been moments where it didn't feel like anything, I had anything left to give. And I think what I've seen though in this space is I've had the opportunity to see the hope in it, because for once in my lifetime, this has never ever happened, where the masses are trying to hear what we have to say and want to hear what we have to say. and want to see what we can do to work together to ultimately win. And I think that part of that is a relation to just the hope that we all have in Jesus, and the fact that Jesus is on the throne, like Merle said earlier.
I mean, one of the things that I think, last week when we were all getting hit with questions on what to do from our friends, what's going on, how are you feeling, what to do, I felt a sense of just exhaustion, as Merle mentioned before. Heath, what are your thoughts on how we as minorities can continue to have the strength to deal with our situation internally, but also be a shining light, an example, and a resource for our friends who are not minorities?
Merle and Terrence hit the nail on the head. Feel it. I've been taking a lot of time to be still and to just kind of recharge, and having these tough conversations with my friends and my sphere of influence in my community has been great. But just pacing myself with it and knowing that change is not going to happen immediately. It's going to continue to have tough conversation, and that call to action of, asking our neighbors, asking our loved ones, asking our friends to kind of like stand side by side with us and demand justice, demand change. But for me personally, it has been being still, feeling that hurt, like Terrence, like you, Fred, like it's exhausting. These last 2 weeks have been very, very exhausting for me. I've reached out to my parents and talking to my dad and just crying it out, sleeping it out, getting away, disconnecting from the news and from people, but just recharging so I can have these awesome conversations like today with my community, whether that's professionally or personally, and being prayerful about what I need to do next in terms of getting some positive change for what's going on up there.
All right, thanks, Heath.
Yeah.
Mr. Cam, you're a father, so I'd love to hear your vision for the world you'd love your kids to grow up in from a race relation standpoint.
To be honest with you, it's simple for me. It's I think the thing that kind of stems the whole algorithm of race, sexism, or some type of some type of feeling that makes a lot of people and things awkward is just having an open mind to find out about it. I think race is kind of stem from one type of person and another type of person not knowing about another type of person, but the other type of person doesn't really want to find out about that. You know what I'm saying? So as a parent, I will teach my kids, no matter what the situation is, no matter what it may be, from a food tasting to a sport to a class in school, just be open to trying it, finding out about it. And I think, with that type of mentality, we all can have an open mind. And at the least, we can just agree to disagree. Because I think a lot of times when you do talk to the opposite race, or you do talk to, people, a lot of people are just blown away because they didn't expect certain things to be a certain type of way.
Absolutely.
With me growing up in Atlanta and it being as diverse city as it is, a lot of people kind of, take on this persona of, well, have you ever listened to country music? No, I don't listen to country music. I don't listen to hip hop. Well, that's your problem. Kenny Chesney is a hell of an artist. You know what I'm saying?
We've talked about that music before in our other stuff that we're doing together. Absolutely. Cam has a very diverse, eclectic taste in music.
Man, listen, I think we all should challenge each other by just having an open mind to just to find out and educate ourselves about anything. I'm not going to sit up here and lie. I don't have all the answers to fix certain things, but when people talk about how they feel, when they talk about Black Lives Matter, when they talk about all lives matter, okay, what's your theory, right? Tell me how you feel. And I'm going to promise you that I'm going to have an open mind and an open heart to just listen to it. A lot of times that is always missed when people start assuming this is how this particular person is going to be. Start assuming this is how this particular crowd is going to be. Start assuming, certain things that they have no idea about. So that's what my message will be to my children.
Cam, thanks so much, man. And on that theme, Merle, I just want to ask you, since you led off in speaking about having courage, and we're going to transition now into the action steps. I would love to hear if there's one thing that you could challenge our audience with in order for us to keep this momentum going, is there one piece of advice that you'd give both minorities and non-minorities who are watching today, so that we can really make this a movement and not just like what happened in 2017, a little blip in the screen? COVID happened for a reason. As you said, this is almost divine intervention. And so what advice would you give us and the audience to do their part in making sure this movement continues?
One of the most important things I think that we need is to listen and to have empathy. Because when you close your ears, for example, if you hear something, say a hashtag that alarms you, you immediately go into your, well, I don't believe, blah, 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 you know, all those kinds of things. But if you open your ears and open your thought processes and try to understand what somebody other than you is experiencing, then we will move forward with that. And that includes, like Cam was saying, educate yourself. There are so many great resources out there. Educate yourself, listen, have the conversations, get on the phone. I can't talk to enough people right now. I want to talk about it all the time. That's all I want to talk about. And the podcast, like if you've never, that 1619 project was amazing.
Yeah, amazing. Absolutely.
You know, find out the specifics of how we got here so that we know how to move forward. But mostly, listen.
And Merle, thank you so much. That is what this segment has been about. It's been an opportunity for us to share so that people can listen. And I couldn't agree with you more. You brought up empathy, and empathy is going to be the first step to bridging any gaps. It's not easy. Some of us, you know, sometimes it takes having a close relationship with somebody who doesn't look like you to actually have that empathy. But doing your own work to ask those questions. Merle said Merle, you're a strong person, because I said I was getting exhausted from answering so many questions, but you're such a strong person. I really appreciate you. That's it for, oh, Nate, real quick, Nate. I
just wanted to piggyback off what Merle was saying, because we sat down with all of our teams and tried to lean in and tried to listen. We had these listening and heard sessions. And that is the best place to start. And I just wanted to say, as you know, the white dude on this panel, one of the lessons that I have continuously been learning is I had to take a deep ass breath every single time. Okay. I'm serious. I had to take a deep breath, and I had to be quiet. And my team members will tell you that I wasn't always quiet. And that's because I'm talking to the white audience. Defensiveness is the first move. I swear. It's, you know, I busted my ass, you know, my whole life, and I'm fighting my own battles, and defensiveness is first. I even told one of our teammates, it's not my fault I have white skin. You know, these are lessons I have been learning from all along this path, but it starts by listening. Easier said than done, but I think back to all lives matter. That is like a defense mechanism, and I think that's where us white folks have got to start by. Almost the first things that come to our mind and our heart and out of our mouth are defensive. It's the wrong spot.
Powerful, Nate. Powerful, Nate. Thank you for speaking to your people. You know, we need allies in this movement.
It's a growth opportunity, man. Growth opportunity.
I absolutely, and I appreciate having an ally like you as a friend. And thank you all for just sharing your stories. And thank you for taking the time. I know the audience has really enjoyed it as much as I have. And so I just want to thank you for sharing the stories. You guys take it easy.
Thank you, Fred.
Wow.
And thanks, guys. So in terms of stories, those are amazing stories, and it's just beginning. What I wanted to do in the first segment is just model what it's like to ask questions, get deep. And I thank everyone who's on that panel for just being so honest and open and vulnerable. It's not easy, I can tell from personal experience. So I thank them for doing that. And before this town hall, I put a request out to you, the audience, to ask for some stories. And so one of the stories that really touched our heart was a video we got from Chrisana. And we're going to show that video here. And after her video, we're going to start talking about action. Towards the end of that panel, we started talking about advice on how to change other people's minds and what we need to do in our own heart. And the whole next discussion, the last discussion we have, is going to be, now that we know racism exists and we feel for our brothers and sisters, what do we do about it? So let's watch the video from Chrisana, and then we'll talk about action.
Hi, my name is Chrisana. So to answer the question of how has racism affected my life, the first thing that I think about is just the conversations my dad would have with me and my siblings as children about how we needed to act around cops, what we needed to do, what we needed to say, how we needed to always put our hands up. Even if we're stopped in a car, we put our hands where cops can see them. And that's programming. Parents do that and program their children so that their children can be safe. Because as an adult, all I hear is my dad in the back of my voice whenever I see a cop. And, you know, it may be a simple traffic stop, but the first thing I think about is, and are the people that have passed because they were stopped, and how the programming that my father gave me as a child could actually save my life. And my 5-year-old niece drew a picture recently in her art class, and it was of a cop shooting a woman and a child. And when she was asked how she saw that, she said, I overheard it on TV and I heard that cops were being bad and killing people. And I thought about how the change that we make and the things that we do now affect future generations. How children growing up right now are gonna need so much therapy because the amount of trauma they're experiencing, we probably never even fully know. I thought about how at 5 years old, she drew a picture with stick figures with their hands up, and the bullet coming out of the gun, and how clear and detailed that picture was. It made me sad that at 5, I, my sister, our family, had to figure out a way to have a conversation with her about why this was happening, the same way my dad had a conversation with me and my siblings about what we needed to do when we got stopped by a cop. And just repeating that cycle and seeing with my own eyes that cycle be repeated and having experienced it and seeing it on my niece, that was a lot, you know? And I just thought back on what can I do? What can we do? Yeah. That's it.
What a powerful story from Chrisana. And as I hear her talk about her experience with her very young niece, it just makes me understand a little bit more why we're here today. I mean, we're going to make change that will affect our lives, but really most of the changes we're going to make is to build a better future, as I asked Cam, for the young people. And so, Chrisana, thank you for sharing that. If we all have a light firing under us right now, and so I want to talk with some experts, and I've assembled them in different fields, legal. We have some authors, and we have Jennifer Brown, who I'm going to introduce first. Jennifer Brown is a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant. And you know what's funny is Jennifer and I had met before and had seen each other before. But when I said to our producer, Jennifer's role, her title, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant, and her name, Jennifer Brown, my producer made a few assumptions about what she was going to look like. Hey, Jennifer, is that something that happens to you pretty often? People make assumptions about what you look like. It happens to me.
Yeah, I'm sure. But thanks for having me. Yeah, I keynote and write books on inclusive workplaces. And I know that the second I step on stage, people are usually really confused about what a white woman that looks like me would know about the topic of diversity and inclusion. And, you know, subsequently, I share some of my diversity story and dimensions, which are invisible about me, including that I'm a member of the LGBTQ community, for example, of other things. And it sort of stops everybody in their tracks. And I think it's a teaching moment around what we don't know about all of us, and that individual heart sitting across from you, their lived experience. And so it's a reminder, I think, about our biases and thinking that we understand what, you know, who we're looking at and who we're working with and who's in our communities, et cetera. So we just take it from there. And I continue to challenge my audiences around a whole bunch of things, which I know we'll talk about.
And I mean, Jennifer, you and I have talked so much, and I know you work with a lot of large companies. You know, in researching our talk, I came across this just staggering stat. And it's by the Center for Talent and Innovation. It says Black people account for about 12% of the United States population, okay? But only 3.2% of senior leadership roles in the US are given to Black people. And only 0.8% of all Fortune 500 CEO positions are Black people. What are some of the reasons you think Blacks in particular are not fully or underrepresented in the higher ranks of companies?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. The problem starts really early on, you know, in terms of, you know, that moment when the same exact resume with two different names or two, you know, one name, and I'll use an example of Jose and Joe, for example, same background, and Jose resume ends up in the no pile. Our unconscious biases are constantly working when we do not know it. And even the most well-meaning amongst us still falls prey to these. It's our faulty wiring, and it's how we're socialized. And there's not a single one of us that's not sort of, this doesn't permeate our thinking and sometimes our actions if we're not careful, but it's very difficult to see it. Therefore, we call it unconscious or implicit. And then it just continues from there. You enter a largely white organization, and you are the only and lonely. You don't see a lot of mentors that look like you, that share your identity, that achieved a certain level. And then you have organizations that aren't aware of the systemic biases that permeate every people process, all the advancement and promotion decisions, all of the performance feedback. There's a double and triple standard applied, particularly to Black talent, that they are told, oh, you're being too aggressive. You know, there's a ton of microaggressions that are very specific to the Black identity, but this is actually true for some other identities as well. And so I focus on the whole kind of big picture of all kinds of talent that don't make it through and don't make it up to the C-suite because it's exhausting. It's literally like walking a gauntlet every single day to try to hang in organizations to get all the way up there when you don't have support, you don't see people that you can count on. You're literally laboring in organizations that weren't built by and for you. And this is very taxing. And it's hard also on our self-image in terms of how we see ourselves, like how confident we are, how we show up when we feel we have to minimize parts of our identity, even though maybe you can see that I'm a woman, I can adopt the behavior of men in order to survive and sort of, you know, fit in. But we shouldn't be asking that of people. You know, we should, when we say bring your full self to work, which is what every company says it wants, we have to really walk that talk. And right now, it's a very uncomfortable place, not of belonging for a lot of people in most employers, I'd say.
Jennifer, you hit on two things that are so important, and you mentioned microaggressions, and that's one thing I wanted us to talk quite a bit. And this came up in many of the stories that we talked about in the first session. And a microaggression is an offense that's done, and oftentimes the offense is both the offender and the person who's receiving the offense are unaware it happens, right? Mm-hmm. So someone may say something, you know, like, you know, give an example of a micro.
How about you're so articulate,
right? So you're so articulate, and someone like me, I mean, I may take that as a compliment, and they may not have meant anything by it, right? And over time, and we heard these stories as a young person, you know, I believe by the time you're 5, you've had thousands of interactions with people, and many of them for a Black person could be a microaggression. And that does a lot to the psyche, like you're saying. And Heath mentioned himself not being able to come out and show up his full self. And so you're saying that shows up in the corporate space as well, where we can't fully, and I would tell you that that's happened to me as well, where you can't show up fully. How do you coach people? How do you create a system where that's not, where that won't be the case?
Yeah, so I have a lot of ideas and passion about this, that I really believe the onus shouldn't be on the affected person to always raise the issue of a microaggression and then have that be a teachable moment. It's exhausting, and it actually penalizes you in terms of always drawing attention to a part of identity. Let's say it is stigmatized and underrepresented and underestimated is another word I like to use. And so when we fight our own battles all the time, it's not only exhausting for us, but it kind of draws attention to not our performance, for example, right? And not how stellar we are. So I think that the role of others to know enough about what a microaggression sounds like, and if we're in the room, we need to be the ones that correct that. We need to be activating our ally voice. But in order to do that, you've got to know what a microaggression sounds like. You need to be able to spot it in that moment or in yourself. Absolutely. You know, you've got to know enough. You should literally, like everyone that says they are an ally, you need to know the top 30 microaggressions that Black talent faces, for example. You need to know those, and you need to be on the lookout for those, both in yourself and in others. And then you need to hold people accountable for them. Call them in, maybe not call them out, right? Call them in, take them aside, say, hey, you know, when you say that, I just wanted to let you know that's not, it's not a fair thing to say. And actually it comes with a lot of baggage when you say that. And here's the historical perspective on that, or whatever. And I do think that, interestingly, I've noticed people listen to other people that look like them.
Yes. And
so the messenger about all this stuff is so important. And that's where I feel very called as a messenger to, if I can get in that room, if I can give that feedback so you, Fred, don't have to, like, that's my job.
You know, Nate did some of that in the first session where he was speaking to people who look like him. If you had a call to action for people who look like you, what would that call to action be?
Yeah, so it would be to educate yourself about the experience of exclusion. And my workplace is my frame. So educate yourself about who struggles to be heard or get ahead or be valued and feel valued in organizations. And then I don't even care if you're a manager, a senior executive, or just a colleague, there are ways you can pay attention to and interrupt bias if you witness it or you're a part of it, and that this is the way we tackle systems problems, because it's a system problem. It's not, it's personal responsibility, sure. But as we've been talking about, it's systemic racism, it's systemic homophobia or systemic misogyny that's built into many organizations, because the organizations in the modern day have been built by a sort of homogeneous group, essentially. And so there hasn't been a lot of deeper understanding about what might be unfair for some and fair for others. Or,
you know, you're sorry, but you're hitting on the systemic piece, and I think a lot of people hear, and we're going to talk about this in the next session. But a lot of people hear about systemic, and we come up in an environment, and we don't really think about how is this environment built. We just do the best we can to get through it. But I know through your research, there truly is systems built to let some people prosper and other people not. And it even took me a while to even believe that, right? Because I am a Pollyanna type optimistic person.
So am I.
Yeah, and I want to believe the best in those who created the systems, and the best in my brothers and sisters, no matter what they look like. And Jennifer, we could talk.
I know.
I mean, if you guys could hear the conversation Jennifer and I had leading up to this, I mean, we've gone deep on so many different issues. And she's a knowledge, and she's a wealth, and she and I will probably have another discussion at length in the future. But I know you're an author of 2 books, and you've assembled a tremendous amount of resources for people who want to learn a little bit more about race in the workplace. So can you talk real quickly about some of your resources?
Certainly, yeah. So I have 2 books. First is Inclusion from 2017, and then second is How to Be an Inclusive Leader, which is 2019. And it's not just about race in the workplace. It's actually all kinds of our diversity dimensions that we don't bring to work. And then how can we all be on a journey of finding our own voice and becoming our own advocate for who we are? So for me, being LGBTQ, but means that I have to remember that 50% of us are closeted in the workplace because of fear. So even though I'm out, I feel I have a responsibility to pull people forward and create a safe space for people to thrive and stay in these companies and do their best work. And so it's about diversity, all kinds of diversity dimensions, and how we can be better colleagues to each other to dismantle whatever's harmful and keeping people back. That's actually not a meritocracy, because workplaces aren't really meritocracies. I mean, and that sounds very cynical. And I know that we all want to think we're totally equal with everything, but it's just not true. And you can be very well-meaning, and you can be a wonderful person. And you and I, Fred, could be Pollyannas. And it's important to be really positive, because I actually think I'm very positive about the potential for change. I just think that it's going to take more than just you sharing like, well, this is my experience. I have to be on board, and then I need to advocate. So I want to say to all the white people listening, we have a lot to do. We have a lot to learn. We have so much more of our voices we could use. And if you can be heard in a way that motivates other people, that's how we can be best advocates for this conversation.
Jennifer, thank you so much. And I can't wait to continue the discussion with you. You mentioned your books, and I should give a plug now, because I didn't mention it at the beginning, but we've created a bundle, including her book and the book from the authors that are coming up. And if you take a picture of any part of this show and post on Instagram what you've learned, one thing you've learned you found interesting, we'll select somebody later this week to give that bundle to. Jennifer, thank you so much for being with us. I can't wait to continue the conversation with you. There's so much more we could talk about. But I'm going to move on to our next two guests. And these two guests are super special. They're also authors. And the first person, sticking with ladies first, that I'd like to introduce is Miss Tisha Hadra.
Hello.
Hey, Tisha,
hey, Fred.
good. Everybody's looking good today. I like it.
You know, I tried to put my lipstick on. I had to come and be on this computer for all the peoples.
Well, Tisha is the executive director, executive pastor at the Church of Resurrection, Los Angeles. She's a former attorney and co-author of the book Black and White. And she's a dear, dear friend of mine. Tisha and I go back, I don't even know how many years, long time, to our days in undergrad. We both went to the University of Florida, and we both served in a student organization entitled Cicerones. Tisha, good to have you. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. And Mr. John Hambrick. John, hey, John. John is the director of Starting Point and staff development at Buckhead Church. And he's from Southern California. He's the author of Move Toward the Mess, and also the co-author of Black and White, the book he co-authored with Tisha. All of my friends, John, have spoken so highly of you, and I'm so glad we got to meet around this town hall. And I'm so excited to have this conversation with you.
Super glad to be here. Thanks for having us, Fred.
Of course, John. So, John, you grew up in Southern California. Real quick, just tell us what your experience was like on the West Coast in Southern California when it came to race relations between you and the kids around you.
Right. Well, I actually was almost in complete isolation from the Black community in Southern California, just not by choice. It's just the way it worked out. But that all changed when I went to Pepperdine, and an unlikely place for that to happen. So I was there, and I met this guy named Bobby Heron. And Bobby was a Black guy. He played volleyball for Pepperdine, and he also surfed, which I did as well. And we figured out that we both loved to surf, so we started being surf partners. You know, you probably have an application for this today, but back then when we were at Pepperdine, you had to drive in your car to find waves. And so we spent a ton of time together, and I got to know what it was like to be a Black man in Southern California.
Okay, that's a big statement. Yeah,
well, it is a big statement. I should say I began to understand a bit more about what it was like. And the more time we spent, the trust levels went up. And it was just so hard when we went surfing. You know, I was just, at the time, a blonde white guy surfing. Nobody cared about how I surfed. Bobby was always the only Black guy in the water, And he said, John, sometimes I feel like I'm in a freak show, because when he was trying to catch a wave, everybody was focused on him.
Wow.
Anyway.
You know, some of us can relate to that story. John, you know, how did you, because it sounds like you gained empathy to our conversation a little bit earlier by having a relationship with someone of a different color. Tell me about your relationship with Tisha. How did you guys meet?
Right. So Tisha went to work for Starting Point, which is a division of Buckhead Church, when I was director of Starting Point, which I still am. And so we began to work together. But as we did, trust levels started to build. And we slowly, because you don't start off talking about racism, but slowly we began to talk about that. I learned what it was like from her point of view. She learned what it was like from my point of view. And I learned so much from her, just as I did from Bobby. And what I wanted to say about Bobby is I didn't have empathy for the experience of Black people until I began to have empathy for the experience of a Black person.
That's powerful. That's powerful, John. Can you say that one more time?
I didn't have empathy for the experience of Black people until I started to have empathy for the experience of a Black person. That was the beginning of what has been a lifetime journey for me. And Tisha has been a super important part of that.
So tell us about the book you and Tisha wrote together. Maybe Tisha, why don't you tell us about the book?
Yeah, so we wrote a book called Black and White, Disrupting Racism One Friendship at a Time. And in that book, as John said, we kind of talk and discuss our friendship and our relationship and the ways that that has shaped us and changed us and transformed us. But we also bring some focus to and shed light on the systemic aspects of racism. You know, it's one of the many reasons we wrote a chapter entitled Racism is Not Always in Your Heart. I actually loved what Jennifer said just before us about the ways that the racism is embedded in our systems. And so we bring attention to that and we think about ways that people can take a first step by coming toward one another, toward people who are different from you, different from us, but then can continue in that journey together in the battle for racial justice.
I want to ask a question because both of you hit on relationships. I'm just going to throw this at you because it's been a question that I've received as we're building out this town hall from some people in our audience. And that's around having the difficult conversation. If someone in your family is racist or your parents are racist or you consider them to have some prejudice within them, how do you broach having a conversation with someone who's that close to you who you may think have different views than you do? Either one of you can answer.
That's a big topic.
Yeah.
I think it's important to start by seeking to understand.
Okay.
And then I also think it's important to try to find some common ground. And that doesn't mean it has nothing to do with compromise. It has nothing to do with being weak. It has nothing to do with changing our point of view. It has to do with trying to see things from another person's point of view. And once you've started that, then you can start to have the more difficult portions of the conversation.
John, this is just a reoccurring theme. And I hope for those watching that we're starting to really hone in on the fact that things start with building a relationship with someone who doesn't look like you. And many times that starts within your heart. Tisha, I'll hit you with a question that I've gotten from quite a few people. And that question has to do with interracial relationships. I was on a podcast, shout out to everyone from Girls Gotta Eat on here. We have a lot of you guys watching today, but I was on a podcast talking about my experience in interracial relationship in college, and you're part of an interracial marriage. So I'm just curious, has your differing race been an issue with family, with each other, with other friends? Has it been an issue?
It's a good question. I think it's important even to remember that just a few days ago, June 12th, was the 53rd anniversary of the Supreme Court case Loving versus Virginia, where the court struck down bans on interracial marriage as a violation of the Constitution. And it's crazy to think about that it was not that long ago that my husband and I could not even have obtained a marriage license in this country. I'm really grateful that we have not had to deal with any hostility in either of our families because of our race. My sweet in-laws are watching now. Hey, mom and dad. So they love me deeply, and they have from the very beginning. I'm sure it's in part because they know that their son is blessed and highly favored to have found me.
Okay, you go, Tisha.
And I do want to say, though, that the fact that my husband is married to a Black woman doesn't mean that he automatically gets to sort of check off some kind of achieve maximum state of wokeness on a to-do list or something, right? He still has to do the work of unwinding his own racial biases, because very similar to John, he also grew up in a mostly homogenous and mostly white environment. And that takes a lot of loving and patient conversations and reading on his part and listening to the stories and experiences of folks in the Black community. But I'm really grateful that our marriage has actually opened up conversations about race within my husband's family and within sort of our families together that wouldn't have happened otherwise. And I'm blessed to say that we have all sort of leaned into that rather than avoiding the topic and pretending as though it doesn't matter that we are of different races. So
yeah, Tisha, thank you for sharing that. It's a great example that you can be in a very successful, loving interracial marriage. Your husband has a great name, by the way. Tell him her husband's name. What's your husband's name?
He's a Fred too, and so is my father-in-law. I'm lots of Freds. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, you just have a thing. I mean, an affinity. We have an affinity towards you, Tisha. So thank you for sharing that. And once again, you both co-wrote the book Black and White. We're gonna have a slide later on telling you. Well, actually, Tisha, why don't you tell people how you can get the book?
Yeah, so you can get the book. It is actually on back order on Amazon, but you can get it via Kindle. But if you go to Cokesbury, COKESBURY.com, you can get it there directly from our publisher, Abingdon Press. And we would really love if you would check it out. There are discussion questions after each chapter. It really is designed to be read in community, and our hope and prayer is that people would move toward one another in deep relationships and then move together as this multi-ethnic coalition to rise up and stand up against racism together. That's sort of our hope and prayer. So everybody go out and get that book. If you're looking for resources, it's a great one. It's relationship first. It also includes some data around systemic racism, but the relationship piece is so important. And speaking of systemic racism, thank you guys. I'd love to introduce my final guest today, who is Mr. Mike Roth. What's up, Mike?
Man, I am staring outside at a torrential downpour. So if you lose me, that's why. Otherwise, I'm doing great. How you doing?
I'm good, Mike. Listen, I've been looking forward to having this conversation and have you wrap things up. Mike is an attorney with Stewart Trial Attorneys. Stewart Trial Attorneys is involved in many of the high-profile cases that brought us here today. They're co-counsel on the Ahmaud Arbery case. They are co-counsel on the George Floyd case. And I wanted to talk, and Rayshard Brooks, is that correct? You're involved with that?
Yeah,
which just happened last night. I brought Mike in here so we could talk a little bit about the cases, right? So it's always interesting to hear from behind the scenes from a legal team that's working on the cases. So real quick, I wanted to talk just a little bit about the two major cases that have taken over the headlines over the past 2 months. And then I want to talk more about the power that we have within the legal system to make change. So Mike, you're involved in the Ahmaud Arbery case, right?
Yes, sir.
And based on our conversations before, you said there's two pieces to the case. Can you describe what two pieces to the case are?
Well, there's two aspects to the case. First, we have the manhunt and murder of Ahmaud Arbery, but then we also have the mishandling of the case by the DA's office, which is currently being investigated by the Georgia Bureau of Investigation.
Yeah, and so with the Ahmaud Arbery case, and I'm assuming that everyone in the audience knows, but this is in Georgia, I believe in late February. 25-year-old Ahmaud Arbery was running in a neighborhood, wasn't his neighborhood, and 3 residents in that neighborhood tracked him down. And then there's a very graphic video of what happened towards the end of that, which is one of the residents that tracked him down shot him and killed him. And so, you know, when you watch that video, it's really hard to see anything but what you see in that video. I mean, for me, when I watch it, it looks pretty clear cut, which is man's running. When you watch him running, he's not even, it doesn't look like he's fleeing. He looks like he's exercising and running. So it looks like a clear cut video. What do you think the defense team is going to come with within the case to make a defense for why the McMichaels were able to shoot and kill Ahmaud Arbery?
So there's 2 things that I believe that they're going to try and argue. First, they're going to try and argue that it was a citizen's arrest, that the McMichaels had every right to come and detain him until the police arrived. And then at the same time, they're also going to come in and say that that Ahmaud Arbery, when he charged him, the McMichaels had every right to use a weapon on him.
So, and you know, I've gotten into that debate with a friend, which is my friend said Ahmaud Arbery, he almost said Ahmaud Arbery deserved to die because if someone's pointing a gun at you, you should never approach that person. You should basically run, which we saw him running. But it's basically Ahmaud Arbery's fault that he got shot. Now, with the stand your ground law, can you walk through real quick who has the right to do what in terms of force, please?
So the stand your ground law, it varies depending on your states. Some states don't even have a stand your ground law. I guess let me just start off by saying the stand your ground law is just the right to defend yourself.
Okay.
And so some states will say you're not allowed to engage, you have to retreat. Some states will say, well, you can only defend in your household. You can, you know, fight in your house. But states like Georgia allow you to defend yourself in the streets, your house. It's a very broad law. So in the case here, when they're saying that Arbery, you see Arbery running around, and he has the right, he doesn't have to keep fleeing around the neighborhood trying to escape until eventually he's, you know, shot. He has the right to defend himself and fight. And that's what you see here. You see a man who at some point has nowhere else to turn, because what you don't see in that video is that they're chasing him around this neighborhood. They're coming around, they're making him turn different directions. He's trying to get out. And at some point you see a man who's like, I have nowhere else to go but forward.
So what you're saying is he had the right at that point to stop and let these guys approach him. And from my understanding, when you stand your ground or in self-defense law, you can match force with force, right? So he's an unarmed person. The McMichaels have a gun. That is not equal force, correct?
So when you're standing your ground, you have the right to use the same amount of force that's necessary to defend yourself. So let's say, for example, the McMichaels have a gun and they're pointing it at him. Well, he can use, and that's deadly force. Well, Arbery could use the same type of deadly force to defend himself. If it was non-deadly force, for example, let's say I'm rolling up on the streets and I'm ready to have a fist fight with someone. Well, you can't come up with a gun and shoot me because that's not equal force. I don't present any deadly force or serious bodily harm to you. I may cause bodily harm, but it has to be either serious bodily harm, such as like disfigurement or, you know, death. So it has to be of equal force. Arbery, when he's charging the McMichaels, it's not equal. And so he has every right to go and charge him and try and take the gun from McMichael. But McMichael doesn't have the right to shoot Arbery because Arbery doesn't have a weapon.
You know, and you know, as I said before, you watch the video, you hear the legal definition of stand your ground and also the explanation of, you know, using force. And you think that this case is going to be open and shut. But we've seen in the past, for example, with Rodney King, that things can happen within a case, whether it's moving venues, selecting the jury, that within the judicial system, you may not get the justice that you expected to get. And I wanted to just quickly go to the George Floyd case. It is what spurred this entire movement. And I wanted to talk to you about just that, the movement and the power of people. So as we're speaking to the audience, just express to them the power that we have versus the power that you have to actually make change in the judicial system.
So we as attorneys, we have, when we represent people, families, we can make, the judicial system only provides a certain amount of justice. And a lot of it you're going to see mostly monetary, and or when we come in, we can maybe make a policy change and hope to make some policy changes, whether it's in a police force, a county, something like that. We're able to do, a little bit here and there, but it doesn't match what you see here with the George Floyd movement, where everyone's on board, and you see where one situation has created a nationwide change. You're seeing things like monuments, buildings that represented Confederate people being taken down and renamed. You're seeing NASCAR, the Navy, they're banning the Confederate flag. You're seeing so much change that, you're really seeing the terms "we the people." When we the people stand up for what we believe in, what is right, it can change the nation. And that's what we're seeing here with George Floyd.
And with the power, so basically what you're saying is because of our voices, we have the ability to affect change. Are you familiar with any of the grassroots organizations in terms of supporting or funding or making donations to any grassroots organizations so that we can monetarily support some of the cases? Are you familiar with any of those?
Well, we have a bunch of GoFundMe pages for a lot of these families. If you go to our website, it's Stewart Trial Attorneys, or our Instagram accounts. Usually we're always setting up GoFundMe pages for these families to kind of help out with everything that's going on. Great.
So Mike, thank you so much. The big message here is I'm interested to see what happens when these cases both move forward. I have my opinion on where I think they're going to go, but you never know. So we're going to stay tuned on both of those cases. And also just, we have power. Our former president wrote in an article a couple of weeks ago. He said that, it's important. Yes, it's important for us to think about who we're voting for president, but much of the power lies in the local government. And that's what Mike is talking about, how the power in our DA, some of us vote for sheriffs, really looking at who the police chief is. I mean, we have power. And I know from my friends, they're getting, especially the voting that happened back on June 9th, much more vigilant than we had been before. So that's going to be one of the positive outcomes within this movement.
And like you're alluding to, it's voting. At the end of the day, the two most important things that we the people have are our voices, which are our votes. You vote. Who is there? Who is representing you? Who's representing your interests? You have the voting, and you have to also have knowledge of your rights. Those are the two biggest things: educate yourselves on your rights and execute your right to vote. And when you do those things, you see the change.
Absolutely, Mike. Wonderful. Good luck on the two cases, and thank you so much for spending some time with us here today and for wrapping things up, Mike. First, thank you. I want to just address, I know some of you guys got on late today. There may have been an issue getting on, so thanks for sticking with us. This show is going to be available in the future, and you can watch it at any point in time. And I just want to thank we have a whole lot of people that stayed on all the way to the end. I just want to thank you guys for doing that. Thank you for all of the support from the audience in then putting this together. I think it's very likely that we'll continue this discussion. I know there's a tremendous amount of questions and topics we didn't get to go to today, but we wanted to keep things to 90 minutes, and we wanted this just be the beginning, just the start of how we have the difficult conversations. I wanted to fit that void where people say, I don't know what it's like to walk in your shoes, but I want to walk by you. Just one thing about what Mike said. If you look at the history of change when it comes to racial inequities, you look back at slavery. Slavery was abolished legally. You look at the civil rights era with segregation. segregation was abolished legally. And now we're looking at the criminal justice system. The criminal justice system, at some point, and I think it's going to be soon, will be fixed legally. And that just leaves one thing, what I call the last mile, and that's our hearts. You cannot legislate somebody's heart. And that's the message I want to give. Today, I want everyone to just, as MERLE mentioned, as Jennifer mentioned, many people mentioned, it's going to begin with our heart. It's going to begin with our, any change is going to begin with our relationships with people who don't look like us. I think working on our hearts is going to be very hard, but I know everyone who's watching this is in for that commitment. And speaking of commitments, I'm making a commitment to you today, and I want to encourage you to also make the commitment alongside of me. So to wrap things up, I put together a pledge. We'll call it the Join the Convo Pledge. And let me walk you through it real quick. It encapsulates this entire conversation. It's a way for you to have guiding principle of what to do, because we want to talk about what we can do to actually make change. And so let me read it to you here. The pledge says, I have the power to end racism and prejudice within myself and my circle of influence. And today I commit to empathize. I promise to actively engage in conversations with those who do not look like me with an open mind and heart. We talked about that. I commit to listen. We talked about that. Not with the intent to speak, but with the intent to understand. Very important. Learn. I commit to doing my own research on the history and impact of racism and prejudice. My own research. I commit to relentlessly checking my heart for any bias and asking myself, how do others who don't look like me receive me? And finally, act. I choose to be an ally to those who do not look like me. I will have zero tolerance for prejudice and racism in my world and will speak out when I see it. As I grow, I will encourage those around me to do the same. I almost get choked up reading this. I believe that if I make this commitment, I can help to end the virus of racism and prejudice because it starts with me. This is going to be something that we're going to share on social media. You'll see a post. I encourage all of you to take the post. We're also going to send it to you in an email. I would love to see you guys commit to this pledge as well. You'll be able to read it in its totality, but it basically has 3 pieces: empathize, learn, and act. It encapsulates what we've discussed here today. I want to thank everyone who's a part of this. I want to thank the production team. I want to thank my friends who encouraged me to do this show here today. I want to thank the marketing team, the PR team. There's a lot of people that are behind the scenes. It was not just me to put this together. So I want to thank all of you guys. And most importantly, I want to thank you in the audience for watching this, for taking this matter seriously, and for you guys wanting to do something about it. Whew. With that, I'm going to say goodbye. Till next time, you guys be strong, and I'll see you later. You're going to see some images of some resources that we're going to put out. We have your email addresses. If not, visit Join the Convo so we can stay in touch with you. Please, please, please follow us on Instagram. We'll be putting out information after this for action plans, what we talked about today. But once again, thank you guys. We're out.